Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today, I was going to provide an introduction to planetary periods. It's also known as the Dasha sequence. This is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective, so ancient Indian astrology that's more than 5,000 years old. So let's take a look here. If you're new to Vedic astrology, Jyotish, or my videos, all of my teaching videos on the subject are on my consult playlist. They can be found there. Wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that subject if you'd like to learn more. Also, my channel is all about playlists, so that different videos are easy to find on different topics. So, like, I have a planets grahas playlist, a houses bhavas playlist, yoga's planetary combinations playlist, and there are others. If you'd like to learn astrology by looking at famous birth charts, I would check out my birth chart archive list 2024 video, which I will be updating soon. That has a list of all the famous charts I've analyzed on the channel and the video you can find them in. Because, like this video, we will be talking about a famous birth chart, but it's not part of the title, so you wouldn't necessarily know. Also, helpful videos to watch with this one, especially if you're new to all this North, South, and East Indian style charts. I cover Western style charts in that video as well. Introduction to navigating birth chart. The Lugna also means ascendant, rising sign, first house. Introduction to the constellations or rashis, constellation or rashi categories, planetary aspects, now benefic and malefic planets or grahas, planetary exaltation, debilitation or uccha nicca, nakshatras or lunar mansions, pravraja yoga, the life focus combination, sarpa yoga, the ambition combination, planetary combustion or asta, planetary war, graha yuddha, and then Venus and Jupiter combustion, chakra guru asta. All right, so there's plenty out there to learn if you're up for it, if you're into it. What is a planetary period? So that may be a new concept for you if you're new to Vedic astrology or you're coming from another type of astrology, like maybe Western astrology. Planetary period is also known as a dasha in Vedic astrology. Okay, so a dasha literally means, when you translate it from Sanskrit, like stage, condition of life, border, hem. So there's a transition period here. But also like a wick, like of a candle, right? So when you burn the wick down, right, that's kind of a way of measuring time. So essentially, what dashas are all about is it's what we call a kala vichara. Okay, kala means time, and vichara means analysis, so time analysis. So there are two main ways of determining, timing of things when you look at Vedic astrology, and the main one is dasha periods, and the second one is gochar transits. Okay. So today we're just going to be talking about Dasha. The other thing to note is that there's a big difference between kala or timing and phala or fruit. Okay. So when we're looking at somebody's birth chart, for example, and you're looking at it, you're assessing different houses and planets and that sort of thing, you might see the potential, a very strong potential for something. Okay, like maybe in marriage or kids or career or something like that. Okay. But the thing is, like, when the reason why Dasha periods are so important is like, when might this come to pass? When might it actually manifest in the, real world, 3D world, okay? The other thing to note is that when you're looking at somebody's chart, they may have like a very strong indication for something, but if they don't run those planets, it may not actually happen. It may just stay as potential. Okay, so that's why like the Dasha timing is important for them. Okay. Now, also, this also gets into the idea of like the difference between static interpretation and dynamic interpretation or analysis. So, static analysis is when we're looking at somebody's chart and we're just looking at like different houses and things. Are like, oh, this looks like it's very possible. There's a strong possibility this might happen, or there's a strong possibility this will not happen, or it'll, go a certain way. But when we're looking at things dynamically, it's sort of like at this point in your life or in this time of your life, in this Daksha period of your life, something's more or less likely to happen. Like the potential of this is more or less likely to fructify and become something tangible, something real. Okay, something that you actually experience. Okay. So static analysis is more the what is possible, and the dynamic analysis or the Dasha analysis, the Kalavichar time analysis, is more when it's possible or when it's likely. Okay. Um, Yeah, and I mentioned this second point already, this next point already, is like the potential in the natal chart may not come to pass if you don't run those planets for a long enough time. They may happen if there's a strong enough, correlation or confluence or karma, either negatively or positively. Then even if you run a sub period or sub dasha, also known as a bhukti, that's a fairly long bhukti, then something might come to pass. But again, there's a big difference between potential in the natal chart and when and if something will actually show up in your life. Okay. A graha dasha, graha means planet in Sanskrit. So graha dasha is basically a cycle of time assigned each planet. Okay. And we're going to talk about that, I think, on the next slide, where we go through the different planets and the different time periods associated with them when we're talking about dasha analysis. Okay. Now, there are various methods of creating this calculation of dashas. Okay, so there's, I think, more than 20, maybe more than that. I don't know. I'm basically familiar with the most popular one or the most widely used one. There are various ones like Ala Chakra, Yogini, Ashtotari, Chara Dasha system. There are many. But the most widely used one, and the one I'm going to talk about today, is the Vimshottari Dasha, okay, which is also known as the Nakshatra Dasha or the Udu Dasha. And this actually stems all the way back to, if you're interested in Shastra or classical texts, the BPH, so Brihad Parashara Hora. So quite an old text talks about various methods of Dasha analysis, and specifically the Vimshottari one, okay? So just a bit of background here and context. Okay, so let's talk about this Vimshottari Dasha. So Vimshottari means 120. Okay, so this is the number of years to complete one full cycle of time. Okay, now each of the 9 classic grahas or planets are assigned different time periods. Okay, the length and the sequence of the planetary periods does not change. Okay, so you don't move planets back and forth. You don't change the number of years each planet is assigned. Okay. The other thing to note is that each dasha, well, again, dasha is kind of the major uh, time period, the main time period, and sometimes it's even called the mahadasha. The maha means the great. Okay, so mahadasha means the great, the biggest kind of a piece of time. Okay. Now there is a sub period to this. Okay, the sub period is a bhukti, and the sub period is an antara, and the sub period is shukshma. Okay. So you can kind of think of this like levels of time, like Mahadasha, Bhukti, Antara, Shukshma, as like similar to like hours, minutes, seconds. Okay. So the sub periods are of decreasing duration. So Mahadasha might last like 20 years. Okay. But a Bhukti might last a year and a half or a month or a week, potentially. Okay. Depending on, what we're talking about here. Okay. And a Shukshma might be like half a day, that sort of thing, a few hours. Okay. So the Vimshottari Dasha sequence is based on so how do you know when you're looking at birth chart? Like, how do they decide like when somebody's born, when you've got the natal chart in front of you, the horoscope in front of you? How do they know where to start? Like, they all start at the same place? No, that they don't all start. All horoscopes don't start at the same place. With the Vimshottari Dasha, part of the reason why it's called the Nakshatra Dasha is because it's based on nakshatras. If you're not familiar with nakshatras, I have a whole video as an introduction to them. They're basically called lunar mansions. There are about 27 of them. Every night the moon passes through a different one. They all have different energies. And after the moon has passed through the 27 nakshatras, you get a lunar month. Okay. Now, each nakshatra is also ruled by different planets. Okay. So depending on where the moon falls, the ruling planet of that nakshatra is the starting point, is the starting graha or planetary period somebody will, start in their life. Okay. Now the thing is that depending on where, like maybe the moon falls at the beginning of that nakshatra or the end of that nakshatra, there are actually sub periods of the nakshatra which will give you your bhukti and then antara and then shikshma as well. Sub periods and sub periods of the nakshatra. Okay. So again, if you want to know, get more background on nakshatras and their padas, and padas are 4, translated as feet. Each nakshatra is 4 padas. And each pada has a different rulership, planet rulership as well. Okay, so that's where we get into, what's the mahadasha, the main dasha, planetary period somebody's born into, and then what's the bhukti or sub period. That gets into the padas and their rulerships. Okay. Now, again, if you have software, this is all going to pop up for you on your software. But just so you understand why the software is popping up certain things at certain times is the sort of the purpose of this slide here. Okay. Now, it's not known why the order is the way it is, like why one planet comes after the other. That's not known. And why each planet was assigned a certain number of years. That's also not known. Now, it is possible, because again, we're talking about ancient Indian astrology. A lot of ancient Indian astrology was not a lot of it's based on observation, with your eye, what do you see with your eyes in the sky? But a lot of it was based on cognition. So it's actually about meditating about like the meanings and the symbols and the relationship of different planets and their conditions and stuff like that. So maybe it was cognized. Okay, that's a possibility. But if you look to the right here, we have a small chart, and this is the Vimshottari Dasha progression or sequence. So let's look at the planets first. So we go from K2 to Venus. So again, like somebody might be born into K2. They would be born into K2 if if their moon was in Ashwini, which is the very first nakshatra, Magha, which is also ruled by K2, or Mula. There are 3 nakshatras that are ruled by K2. So if the moon falls in those 3 nakshatras, the person will start off their mahadasha in K2. Okay. After K2 comes Venus. After Venus comes Sun. After Sun comes Moon. After Moon comes Mars. After Mars comes Rahu. After Rahu comes Jupiter. After Jupiter comes Saturn. After Saturn comes Mercury. Okay, so you have 9 planets there. Now, if you look to the right of that, the planets list, you'll see the years that are assigned to each planet. So if somebody was born into K2, if they were born on the, within the, very first degree of like Ashwini, for example, they will have almost a full 7 years of K2 that they run. Okay. And then when they move on to Venus, Venus will run for 20 years. Okay, so if somebody's born into K2, basically they don't move into their sun period until they're almost 30, potentially. Well, even if you shave off like 1 year, like let's say you only have 1 year of K2, you'll be between 21 and 27 years of age by the time you get to your sun period if you're born into K2, meaning your moon was in Ashwini, Magha, or Mula. Okay. So sun, and you can see there's a pretty big difference with some of these periods. So K2 is pretty short. It's only 7 years. And then the next one, Venus, is 20 years. It's almost 3 times as long. Then sun is 6 years. That's the shortest one. Then moon, 10 years. Then Mars, 7 years. So the 3 kind of fiery planets, K2, sun, and Mars, are the shortest ones, 7, 6, and 7 years. Then Rahu is pretty long, 18 years. Jupiter, 16 years. Saturn is 19 years, and Mercury is 17 years. So if you add up all these years, you will get your 120, which again is the Vimshottari number. Okay. So again, this is all, maybe very abstract. That's why I wanted to look at some examples. I think it's on the next slide. Hold on, let's see. Yes, so here's an example for you. So again, if you have, Vedic Astrology software, you will see, graph or tables, lists like this, okay? So this is the same chart, same information, but at different levels, okay? So on the left, you can see at the very top left corner, it's Vimshottari, okay? And then if you go across, it says NW, that means now. So if you click on that, like on the software, if you click on now, it'll bring you to the current dasha that somebody's in. If you click on 0, that will give you the birth dasha. If you toggle back and forth with date, that'll move you back and forth through their dasha sequence to whatever period you want to look at. And then if you toggle with LEV's level, that'll give you more information. Like that'll give you not only the mahadasha, but then the bhukti, and then the antara and the sukshma. Okay. So these two lists are basically, the first one is just the mahadasha. And then the second one is the mahadasha with the bhukti with antara and the sukshma. So 4 levels of detail here. Now, this information is based off the birth chart for the United States. Okay, so we'll be using that as an example. So if we look at the first chart here, okay, so the United States, the kind of birth date used for the United States is 4th of July, 1776. That's when the Declaration of Independence was signed. Okay. So you can see if we just look at the first list here, pointing to it right away, the mahadasha, first mahadasha Mars, began on 17th of August, 1769, and runs, okay, until 17th of August, 1776. So you can see that the United States Declaration of Independence was signed just like a month, was it 2 months? A month and a half before there was a switch between Mars and Rahu, Mahadasha. So very tail end of Mars. Okay. And let's see. Wait. Let me just check. Yeah, okay. So if we want more detail, then you click on level. Okay. That'll give you that'll give you 3 more levels of information. So that'll give you the bhukti, the sub-period, the antara, the sub-sub-period, and the sukshma, sub-sub-sub-period. Okay. So then if you look at the second list here, you can see now the time between the dates is minimized. It's very short now. So now we're looking at 2nd of July, 1776. On that day, the Mahadasha was Mars, the Bhukti was Moon, the Antara was Venus, and the Shukshma was Venus. So Mars, Moon, Venus, Venus. Then it changes on 8th of July, 1776 to Mars, Moon, Venus, Sun. Okay, so you can see in between 2nd of July and 8th of July, the 4th of July is when this declaration was signed. Basically, at that time, the Mahadasha, the main dasha was Mars, and the sub-period Bhukti was Moon. Antra, the sub-sub-period was Venus, and the sub-sub-sub-period was Venus, the Shukshma. Okay. Now, the Mars Mahadasha, you can see again, United States was born, in the very last month and a half of Mars. Okay. The Mars Mahadasha actually started 17th of August, 1769, and yeah, and then ended 17th August, 1776. So what is that? So 69, 76. Yeah, so again, that's 7 years. Okay. And what did I put here? So the United States, okay, so on the very left here, I have a few notes. The United States, the moon position of the United States on the 4th of July, 1776, at the specific time of 17:10 p.m., it's like 5:10 p.m. in the afternoon. The moon was in the nakshatra of Dhanishta, specifically in Pada 4. Dhanishta, that nakshatra, is owned by Mars. So that's why Mars is popping up here as the main planetary period in which the United States was born. Okay. Now, Pada 4, so this is the 4th division of Dhanishta, is ruled by the moon. That's why the moon pops up here as Bhukti, the sub-period lord. Okay. So again, just so you have more of a context instead of this just all being abstract, like what is this all tied to? Okay. So let's keep going here. Okay, so what does this mean? So, what actually happens, like if a dasha period is basically, you know, uh, pointing out when things may or may not happen. Like what do when we see that a person or a country or a whatever entity is born at a certain time or is going through a certain is born in a certain dasha or going through a certain dasha, what do we do with that? Like what do we kind of see, or how do we analyze that? How do we utilize that information? Okay. So we're going to continue with the United States birth Dasha as an example. Okay, so again, the United States birth Dasha, mahadasha, the planetary period in which the United States as a country was born is Mars, and that ran from August 1769 to August 1776. Okay, and the United States was born right at the tail end here in the last month and a half. Okay. So you'll see there's a list here of different things that you would expect. Okay, and we have a few slides of this, so there's a lot. Okay, now this chart down below, this is actually the chart of the United States. Okay, so if you're not familiar, there is this is a North Indian style chart. Okay, so to orient yourself to a North Indian style chart, this top diamond in the middle, that's what's known as the ascendant, the rising sign, first house, also known as the lagna in Sanskrit. Okay, that little 8 in the bottom corner, that 8 refers to the 8th zodiac sign of Scorpio or Vrishika in Sanskrit. Okay, so what this means is we have a Scorpio rising chart here. Okay. And yeah, to get to the other houses, you count inclusively from the first house and you count counterclockwise. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 12. Okay, just to give you some orientation. Okay, so let's start going through the list. Okay, so number 1, what you would expect to be activated during a particular dasha. And right now we're just looking at Mars as an example. Okay, so what we only had a month and a half left of this Mars mahadasha. Okay, what would we expect to happen or to show up, again, at the tail end here, or would have happened, might have happened, before signing the Declaration of Independence. But in this last month and a half, what would we expect? Well, one, yogas would be activated. Okay, yogas specifically that the Dasha Lord, and the Dasha Lord again being Mars in this case, participates in. So what are yogas? If you're not familiar, I have a whole playlist on different yogas. Yogas are different planetary combinations. Okay, so are there any yogas, at least I've mentioned so far that I've taught in my videos, that Mars is participating in? Well, yes, there is. Mars is down here in the 8th house with 3 other planets. There's 4 planets here. This conglomeration of 4 planets creates what's called a pravraja yoga. Okay. This is a focus. It's a focus yoga because all this planetary energy is like in one house. So in some houses it's 3 planets together, in other houses it's 4 planets together. So this is definitely a pravraja or life focus that Mars is participating in. Okay. Now I don't have a video on this, but another yoga that Mars is participating in is a balarishta yoga. Okay, a balarishta yoga is when you have, I usually see it as like 4 or more planets in negative houses. And not only do you have these 4 planets in the 8th house, which is the negative house, but then you have Ketu in the 2nd house. So you have 5 out of 9 classic planets in negative houses. Balarishta yoga. Balarishta yoga can indicate a difficult childhood. And it might be so difficult that actually a child does not survive. And that can be difficult, like mentally, physically. Okay, so this is not an easy time, despite the signing of the Declaration. This is clearly not a easy time for the United States here. And that's part of why they signed the Declaration of Independence, because they wanted, the new rulership, new leadership. Okay, so again, this is just an example. Yogas that a Dasha Lord is participating in, again, Mars in this case, will be active. Okay, so there's a focus here in the 8th house. 8th house represents things like psychology. It represents things like scandals. It represents things like, you know, uh, alternative thinking, chronic problems, chronic deep problems. Okay, and especially when we have the ruling planet for the chart, the Lagnesha, and again, since we have a Scorpio rising chart here, Vrishika Lagna, Mars rules Scorpio, and Mars has gone to the 8th house. Okay, Mars is in the 1st degree of Gemini here. So any planet in the 1st or last degree of a sign is called Sundi, and Sundi essentially is indicating that there's instability here. So there's instability here regarding 1st house matters, and the 1st house matters are literally like physicality, psychology. There's a lot of stress and strain physically and mentally on the United States at this time. And the other thing is that there's consideration, deep psychology, okay, about how do we ameliorate this and how do we define ourselves is what's coming through here. Okay. So just as again a first pass. Okay, so now let's look at the second one. So second point here, the Shah Lord, again Mars, natural benefic or malefic nature. Okay, so Mars, if you've seen my video on natural benefic and malefic, Mars is a natural malefic planet. Okay, so there will be malefic energies associated with Mars, what it is, and all the other things that it affects in the chart. Okay, so again, not a positive, happy time, generally speaking, for the United States. There will be strength here. There will be courage here because Mars represents courage, but there will also be fighting because Mars represents fighting, violence, and enemies. And again, long-term chronic problems related to that. Okay, and again, instability here, a lot of instability as well. So now the third point, the house occupied by and the planets conjoined by the Dasha Lord as a natural benefic or malefic planet. So Mars is in here. So the house it occupies is the 8th house. So deep psychology. This is going to be a lot of fighting because Mars is a fiery planet. Sun is also here. So you have two fire planets, in the 8th house of deep psychology. This is a lot of anger, irritation, frustration, impatience going on in this 8th house. Okay. And then also, being frustrated with all these long-term chronic problems of leadership. Now, again, this is as a natural malefic. So Mars as a natural malefic is going to bring malefic energy to these aces. So this isn't going to be like you could, excuse me, if you had Mars and Sun together and maybe, well, you do have two different benefics here, but the thing is these are compromised, which I'll talk about, but like if instead of running Mars, we were running Jupiter or Venus, which are two benefics, you would have a more positive outlook in the deep psychology here. But we're running Mars. So Mars, again, a rebellious planet, pioneering planet. This is like, wanting to take off and relieve oneself of all this burden here in the 8th house. Okay. But in this current time, at the time the United States was born, you're going to have this fighting energy going on. Okay. And it says, plus the planets conjoined by the Dasha Lord. So Mars is going to be irritating, irking, these other planets. Sun, which represents like the king, president. Also Jupiter, Venus. Jupiter and Venus represent people, human beings generally. Jupiter also represents children. Venus also represents like spouses, loved ones. This is like family type energy over here, friends and family over here. And the thing is, Jupiter and Venus are in a nakshatra card, Ardra. Ardra is symbolized by a teardrop or a drop of water, and the drop of water can symbolize like like sadness, frustration. Ardra is also associated with psychology as well. So there's a lot of like deep psychological, issues going on here. Sadness, frustration, shocking events, that sort of thing. So lack of stability again. Mars is in a nakshatra called Mrigashirsha. Mrigashirsha is symbolized by a deer's head, and it's about that kind of, sort of common symbol of like the deer going through the forest and seeking, a new path in an unknown world. Okay, so Mars, again, the ruling planet, is unstable, but seeking some sort of new path for all these, sad, frustrated humans down here and leadership as well. Okay. But again, at this time, because we're running Mars, there's going to be irritation and, being fed up and frustrated and angry and all this, Okay, so what did I write here? 8th house, right? The sun, I didn't mention the nakshatra for that. Sun is in Punarvasu. Punarvasu is symbolized by a quiver of arrows. So there's this energy of having a home base going and coming back. So again, this could be like a revolving leadership here. Okay, now I don't know the details. I mean, I was trying to find some kind of information about this time, the specific time But this signing of the declaration kind of eclipsed a lot of other details of this time period. So I don't know exactly what's going on. I did learn a little of some things which I will share, but so leadership might be revolving here, going out, coming back, that sort of thing. Jupiter is combust, okay, meaning Jupiter's so close to the sun you can't see it. Jupiter represents things like law, it represents things like justice, fairness, generosity, and it's combust. So when a planet's combust, it means you can't see the outer effects of the planet. So this is like a kind of a lawless, unfair, type of system that they're dealing with at this time. Okay. Jupiter is also about graciousness, diplomacy, no diplomacy as well. Okay. So it's fighting time, essentially. Venus, at this particular moment, Venus is not combust, but it will be combust the next day. Okay. So essentially, the two great benefics, Jupiter and Venus, the two diplomatic, social grace planets, are sorry, combust here. Okay. Now, if you've seen my video, I have a whole video on Jupiter Venus combust. When you have one, but especially when you have both that are combust, that calls for a lot of chaos and destruction. We actually had that situation happen last year in May. And in the United States, what happened was you had all this chaos going on at universities, at schools across the United States, where students were protesting different political activities in the Middle East. And students were, like vandalizing property and barricading themselves in buildings and all this sort. A lot of them got like arrested, and some of them got expelled and that sort of thing. They were it was just like complete chaos. So, it makes sense for this moment in time. But the other thing to note is that, this is essentially always present in the United States, which is, kind of shocking in a way. And again, if they had, had a Vedic astrologers on board, they probably would have said, why don't you wait until Jupiter and Venus come back online, because this is going to cause a lot of chaos, especially when they're the two great benefics. Then all that's left are all these malefic planets. It's a pretty harsh state, to live in, or nation, country to live in. Okay, because there's, no social grace, there's lack of relationships. I mean, I've known people that were here in the United States for even a few years, like to do training and, educational training, and they decided to go home because they're like, people don't really talk to each other. There's no real sense of community or neighborhoods or whatever compared to where they're from, and they're used to that deeper social networking and stuff like that. Anyway, the other thing is that, as if that wasn't enough, Jupiter being combust, Venus will be combust the next day. So within a few hours of this time, they're actually in planetary war within a few days of this as well. So that means that it will bring instability to Jupiter and Venus planets, but also the houses that they own, which are the second house of family, inner circle. So the seventh house, spouse-like partnership, independent business, path in life. And the 12th house of losses and expenditures. I missed one. 12th house, or fifth house of children and counseling. Okay, so a lot of stuff that needs to be addressed here. A lot of instability. And again, from a Vedic astrology perspective, not an auspicious time to start any kind of endeavor that you want to be beneficial and lasting. So I don't know, it kind of made me think, wow, it's kind of amazing that the United States still exists based on this. Okay. Then the next point, for houses and planets aspected by the Dasha Lord as a natural benefic or malefic. Okay. So what is Mars aspecting here? So Mars has 3 different aspects. And I have a whole video on that as well if you're not familiar with them. So these red arrows coming from Mars in this circle of planets in the 8th house, this is where Mars shines its energy. Okay, so are there any planets? So Mars is already affecting Jupiter, Venus, and Sun because they're conjoined, they're in the same house. and constellation. The Mars is also aspecting 4 houses away onto Saturn, 7 houses away into Sagittarius. There are no planets there, and then 8 houses away onto Ketu. Now, when Mars aspects Saturn, I've mentioned in my videos before, when you get Mars on Saturn, Mars is an initiator, pioneering planet, and Saturn is like endurance. So when you get Mars and Saturn together, this is like a lot of endurance, um, engineering, manufacturing type energy. And the 11th house here is income, clubs, groups, and society. So again, as far as clubs, groups, and society, this is not a very cushy place to be. Saturn is a natural malefic, Mars is a natural malefic. Saturn is in a nakshatra called Chitra, which is all about structure and architecture. So this is all about, designing group. It's not a very lovey-dovey, warm and fuzzy of 11th house. But there will be gains through manufacturing, like probably railroads, that sort of thing. Okay. There's also a duality here because the constellation associated or ruling the 11th house is Virgo. Okay. This is a dual Earth sign. Okay. But anyway, you're going to bring all this Martian energy. So again, creating new structure of clubs, groups, and society. Okay. And there's going to be kind of, again, 2 ways here. So again, there's going to be people on board with this action of declaring the independence from, the British, and the people are going to be for. And it was kind of funny when I was reading about this time period. There were people who would like fight for one, like the British army, and then they'd bail, and then they'd go to the American army, or the other way around. So people were, swinging back and forth, in terms of who they were in alliance with. And then we have Mars aspecting Ketu. Now, Mars aspecting Ketu, Mars is exalted in Capricorn where Ketu is sitting, which is great. So it's going to be a strong Mars. And also the 3rd house represents siblings, neighbors, okay? And Mars represents enemies and siblings. So we have strong, physical action, violent action going on here in the 3rd house of like neighbors and siblings. So this is like, again, people kind of fighting on both sides, almost like a civil war. I mean, it wasn't the American Civil War, but almost like that. And I don't know, maybe I didn't look, but maybe during the Civil War, like we were running K2 or something like that. But but when you get Mars and K2 together, this is a very explosive energy because K2 is like Mars, and it's even more erratic. Mars is an erratic planet because of the fact that is non-linear, not a very predictable, not the most predictable path in the sky. And Mars and K2 represents like unexpected, hidden things, kind of a sudden left turn all of a sudden. So Mars and K2 together is going to be like sudden, like endings or abrupt endings or violent, actions and things like that. The 3rd house also represents like non-oral communication. So this is essentially what the Declaration of Independence is doing. Is it's a written document breaking off from previous groups and society here. Saturn and the 11th house here. Okay. So yeah. So again, this 4th point here, houses, planets, aspect of the Shell Lord. Mars again is affecting the 2nd house and also oral communication. There's probably a lot of like yelling and screaming and stuff. The other thing is you have this Mars, Jupiter, Venus, Sun combination all aspecting the 2nd house. And again, Jupiter being combust, Venus going combust the next day. There's not a lot of compassion, generosity. This is a lot of, yelling and fighting here going on. Not only, in families and inner circles, but just, bad probably on the streets, So that's what this malefic Mars is bringing to the 11th house, 2nd house, 3rd house, and Saturn and K2. That's what Mars is coloring these things at this time. Now let's look at the next slide. So what else can we expect during a particular dasha? And again, we're looking at the United States, birth dasha Mars as an example here, just to make these, abstract concepts more concrete. So the 5th point here is planets that conjoin or aspect the dasha lord is natural, benefic, and malefics. Okay. So planets that conjoin Mars, that would be this Jupiter, Venus, Sun. Okay, Jupiter and Venus are two great benefics. Okay, but again, Jupiter's combust, Venus is going combust the next day. You won't see this diplomacy here. You won't see the sadness here. It'll be internal. It'll be stronger internally. So this is like, maybe you would think like this is the good fight, like fighting to relieve, this sadness of society, grants us, of society. And Jupiter and Venus are both benefic, so that's nice because that'll keep, even though they're internal, that'll keep this Mars from going completely off the rails, because Mars can go completely off the rails, especially if it's loaded up with a bunch of malefic planets. But luckily, Jupiter and Venus, are there. However, there are two malefic planets as well. Sun is there, and Saturn is aspecting Mars. And last slide, we saw Mars aspecting Saturn, but Saturn's, so there's a mutual aspect going on between Mars and Saturn. So there is this like, and the thing is like, Saturn and Mars are what you will see, and Sun as well. Venus for a minute before, or a day before it goes combust here. So you won't necessarily see the potentially good intentions here to rectify the sadness and misery of people. Okay. And I think this kind of gets at like, this brings like kind of a, whether it's a story or myth or reality or whatever, or, some people, you'll hear other people from other countries say like, it's like, the United States is always kind of overstepping its boundaries and going to other places and kind of trying to be the savior, or and save different places, but they're, sometimes they just kind of muck around. Like it kind of goes like that, right? But this is where this is coming from, is this sort of, because this is also this eighth house with these four planets. This is like that. I don't know the whole quote, but it's like written at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty, which is a great symbol for the United States, and it's in New York. Give me you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry, right? I mean, it's like basically, originally at this time, it was like, send me your, people that are low and downtrodden, right? It wasn't a message of like, send me the best of your best. Let's try to steal the best that you have of your country. It's like, send me the people who are suffering and tired and sad. And, that was the original. And that's where this eighth house is also showing here, right? Fighting the good fight. But again, you may not see the diplomacy here because it's, again, Jupiter's combust, Venus is about to go combust. And again, they're going to be in planetary war. Although, again, when you have Jupiter and Venus in planetary war, that's not really much of a war because they're two benefics, but you do have like the Mars and Sun here. So this is sort of like trying to figure out how to diplomatically, congenially become powerful leaders here, in terms of developing this new nation, the United States at this time. Okay. So again, you have two benefics affecting Mars, and then you have two malefics affecting Mars. So you're going to have a mixed energy going on here with Mars, and Mars is already unstable because it's Sunday. So it's, so again, and then then you would look at like the sub periods. Moon is not involved here, but the sub period was Venus, and luckily Venus was not combust this day. So Venus is like social grace, diplomacy, compassion, generosity, that sort of thing. So at least on this day, at this particular moment, Venus was positively, benefically affecting Mars. It's going to bring out the better side of Mars rather than like, Saturn is like, just endurance and, hardcore energy. Now, the sixth point here is houses which the Dasha Lord occupies or aspects, and the planets which they conjoin or aspect in the capacity as the Lord of certain houses. Okay. So before, we were just like on the previous slide, we were looking at Mars affecting the planets that conjoin. So Jupiter, Venus, Sun, and houses, the planets it aspects, so Saturn and K2, and then the houses it's in the eighth house, and the houses it aspects, so 11, 2, and 3. that was in the capacity of as a malefic or benefic. Okay, so Mars was bringing malefic energy to those things. Now we're talking about the capacity, specifically capacity as the lord of certain houses. So what Mars is the lord of the 6th house here of enemies, and it's also the lord of the 1st house here. So we have Aries in the 6th house, Scorpio in the 1st house. So it's going to bring 6th house issues and 1st house issues, so enemies and self, to all of these planets as with aspecting in the houses as well. So this is, this is the Revolutionary War. American Revolutionary War was essentially started with this document. We're tired of this, this is not working for us. This leadership is, ending, chronic problems with this leadership, unjust laws, that sort of thing. Okay. So the 7th point here, the houses the Dasha Lord owns, and the effects of these houses by virtue of the position that the Dasha Lord is in a certain house. Okay, so let me just see. Okay, so what does this mean? Okay, so what we're looking at is, what is Mars bringing? Okay, the houses that the Mars owns. So again, we're talking about the 6th house here and the 1st house here. Okay. Now, what are the effects these houses have by the virtue of the position of the Dasha Lord in a certain house? So basically, Mars is in the 8th house, chronic long-term problems, okay? So what that means is the 6th Lord has gone to the 8th house. The 6th Lord, again, is Lord of daily activities. This is going to be a lot of erratic daily activities, also enemies. This has become a chronic problem. The other thing is that Mars, okay, like if we spun this chart to the 6th house, where we have Aries in the top position, in the 1st house, Lugna, Mars has gone 3 houses away to a negative house. Okay, so acute problems have become chronic, essentially, is what's coming to light here in this chart. Okay, now similar kind of thing is happening in this chart with the 1st house. The 1st house, again, is like the physicality, overall, reputation, strength of a country, in this case, a country or person, psychology, like the Mars has gone 8 houses away, a negative house from the 1st house. So again, there's a lot of anger and frustration, and erratic behavior, and again, there's a seeking of a new identity here because of this long-term chronic problems. Okay, so again, this is what we're getting when we're looking at the Dasha Lord Mars and where it's positioned in relationship to the houses it's own. In this case, the 6th house of enemies and the 1st house, overall physicality, psychology of the nation. Right? There's too much going on here that's trying to be remedied. And there's essentially a fight brewing, but there's also, like, again, a new identity being forged, a new, deeper psychology. How do we bring a better psychology to, the country, the nation, people of this country? Yeah. All right. So on the next slide. All right. So a few more here. So the 8th point here, houses owned by the planets which conjoin or aspect the Dasha Lord. These are going to be activated. So the houses owned by the planets conjoin, there's going to be a lot. Basically, the whole chart is active because Mars is on so much here. So the planets conjoin with Mars, Jupiter, Venus, Sun. Jupiter owns 2 houses, which is the 2nd house and the 5th house. And then Venus owns 2 houses, which is going to be the 7th house and the 12th house. And Sun owns 1 house, the 10th house here. So between these 3 planets alone, you've got 5 other houses that are, their energy is being drawn into this kind of conglomeration in the 8th house of long-term problems. Okay. And then also, houses owned by planets that aspect the Dasha Lord. So Mars also aspects Saturn, which owns 2 more houses. K2 doesn't own any houses. So between Jupiter, Venus, Sun, and Saturn, 7 out of 12 houses here are going to have this Martian influence. I mean, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, that's 7, right? Wait, 2, let me count. 2, 3, 4, Jupiter, 5. So it's just Saturn and Jupiter, that's 4. And then 2, 7, and 12. And then let me just check here. 10 and 11. No, I need to erase one. So not the 11th house. But yeah, 7 out of 12 houses are going to be affected because of this, in a Martian way during this Martian Dasha. Okay. Okay. And then the ninth point here, houses influenced by the disposer of the Dasha. Okay, so who's the disposer? The disposer is the ruler of the house in which Mars, the mahadasha, sits. So mahadasha again is Mars. Mars is sitting in the 8th house. The 8th house is a little 3 in the top corner. 3 refers to the 3rd zodiac sign of Gemini. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. Okay. So houses influenced by the disposer of the Dasha. Now this gets a little nuts. I mean, I was kind of shocked when I looked at it, in this level of detail. But Mercury affects almost everything in this chart. Okay. How is that possible? Well, Mercury is in the 9th house, so it'll affect the 9th house. 9th house refers to government, authority, father, spirituality, religion. Okay. Mercury, you see this green line goes across. Mercury aspects the 3rd house. Again, neighbors, siblings, courage, nonverbal communication. Okay. The other thing is Mercury owns the house that these 4 planets are sitting in the 8th house. So Mercury, Gemini creates a field for Mars, Jupiter, Venus, Sun. So Mercury influences these 4 planets. Saturn sits in Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. So the only planet kind of not ruled by, influenced by Mercury is Moon. However, Moon is sitting in Aquarius. Aquarius is owned by Saturn, and Saturn is sitting in a sign of Mercury. So actually, indirectly, Moon is also affected by Mercury. Okay. So it's amazing, like essentially what this is, even though, this is a Scorpio rising chart, and at the start of this, the birth time of this, the United States was ruled by Mars. Again, we only had about 6 weeks of Mars mahadasha before we flipped into Rahu. Okay, now you can see Rahu is with Mercury. Rahu is a north node of the moon, and it indicates like a very a lot of ambition, but also like unexpected, hidden, unusual type of activity as well, hidden activity as well. Okay, but Mercury again is basically affecting all the planets here. The other thing to know is that this ascendant nakshatra is in Jesta. Okay, that's AS 21 degrees 37 minutes at the top here. Jesta is a nakshatra that's ruled by Mercury. I was like, I was kind of, before I really got into this, I always kind of thought of the United States chart as a very Martian type of chart. But then when I was really looking at it for this video, I was like, no, it's actually Mercury. And again, Mercury represents the analytical mind, the logical mind, communication, travel, business. And then again, it's affecting Mars, which again is the birth mahadasha, and then Rahu, the next mahadasha, after the 6 weeks is over. And actually, we're currently in the United States running Rahu again. So, yeah. So, let me just see my notes here. So, houses that Mercury affects 3 and 9 because of the planet, 8 and 11 because it owns the house, the signs that are in those houses. 8 out of 9 planets are directly touched or affected because of houses 3, 9, 8, 11 by Mercury. The Lugna Nakshatra I mentioned is Jesta, ruled by Mercury. So this is a mercurial dominated chart. The other thing is that, like I was saying, Mars is shifting, the mahadasha is shifting in 6 weeks. Now, if you know about mahadashas, this is another detailed level thing, but you don't, it's not like you have a hard start and stop on the day when you shift mahadashas. Okay, there's an overlap period. So because we're so um, close to the end, the last 6 weeks, okay, of the Mars Mahadasha, that means that there's actually a lot of upcoming Mahadasha energy. I mean, there's a lot of Rahuvian um, energy in this chart that's not apparent unless you look at the Dasha periods and where, specifically where in the Mahadashas they are. Okay. The other thing is, just like Venus is going combust the next day, Mercury shifts from Pusha, which is the nakshatra, which is symbolized by a cow's udder. There's a lot of like emotional stability and development here, nurturance and that sort of thing. Mercury is shifting from Pusha to Punarvasu in 7 hours from this chart. So like very soon. And Punarvasu, again, is a home base. It's the quiver of arrows symbol. So home base, going out and coming back, this like rotating energy. But also Punarvasu, it's an arrow. An arrow is a weapon, a sharp point and all that. Okay, so we're going from like a nurturing energy to a fighting energy here. Okay, and again, because you can see Mercury's here at 3 degrees 27 minutes in Cancer, I would see this as like a dual energy associated with Mercury. Okay. The other thing is if and Mercury again also relates to the logical analytical mind. But then I was looking at Moon too. Moon is at 6 degrees 26 minutes in Aquarius here. It's in Dhanishta, which is it's symbolized by a nakshatra, which is symbolized by a drum. So there's rhythm here, mental rhythm. The moon represents the sensory emotional mind. Moon is shifting from Dhanishta to Shatabisha in 30 minutes from the specific time. So what that means is the moon is shifting and unstable. Mercury, the analytical mind, is shifting and unstable, and it's with Rahu. Okay. So just from that, I was getting like Rahu, Mercury, Moon, and the sub period, right? The bhukti period is Moon here. This is almost like an energy of an eclipse. Okay. And I will talk about this, but actually, you can see with the sun closing in, getting close to Rahu here, there was an eclipse coming. That happened on the 15th of July, so 10 days after the sign of declaration. So actually, even though it's not apparent, there's a lot of eclipsed energy, hidden energy here, especially with 4 planets in the 8th house. 8th house is all about like hidden things. So there's a lot that's not seen here, okay, in the chart, but also for the United States, since this is the United States chart. Okay. I'll talk a little bit more about the eclipse, I think, on the next slide is coming. But just so you see, when you really get deep into this, what this means is that there's going to be a lot of duality here, but essentially, this is all going to come down to unusual and ambitious ideas, communication, and also business here. Especially when you have this Jupiter combust and Venus combust in a matter of hours. Yeah, this is a fairly hardcore energy. Yes. Then the 10th house, the 10th point here, matter signified by the Cha Lord self. So what does Mars represent? Essentially, this is what this point. Mars represents pioneering energy. It represents fighting. It represents commander-in-chief of the army. Okay, which in the United States, the commander-in-chief and the king or the president are the same person. Because the president of the United States is also commander-in-chief of the army. And you can see Mars and Sun here together. So Sun represents king or president, and Mars represents like CEO or commander-in-chief. Okay. And especially with Jupiter being combust, Venus going combust, this is about like not going along with this flow anymore, not going along with the plan anymore, not going along with the British overlordship here. That also means that this energy that helped the United States individuate and become independent is also something that is part of its identity as well, and the way that it handles itself in the world and with other countries today. Okay. And Scorpio is a rising sign, it's ruled by Mars. And again, Mars is a rebellious planet. So there's a rebellion going on here. But then that also means that, it's not about just like playing nice, right? So matter signified by the Dasha Lord again. So things signified by Mars. Mars is enemies. Mars is fighting. Mars is war. Mars is aggression. Mars is, actions, rebelliousness. So again, leadership, pioneering, fighting energy. So that's the vibe going on here with the birth mahadasha of the United States. All right, so let's look at the next slide. I've got some more stuff coming. Okay. Now, what about when Rahu and Ketu or dashas are going on? Because Rahu and Ketu, they don't own houses. So a lot of that stuff, like the 10 points I mentioned with Mars, don't apply to Rahu Ketu. So what happens during a Rahu and Ketu mahadasha? Now, again, Rahu Dasha happened 6 weeks after signing the Declaration of Independence. And also, we're currently running Rahu in the United States now. Okay. So let's see. So the first point here with, again, Rahu and Ketu, the house they occupy, that's still the same. Okay. So Rahu is right up here in the 9th house of government, authority, religion. Okay. And again, what's the nature of Rahu? There's a hidden, unexpected quality here, ambition here, and there's a lot of that going on in the United States. I mean, like our current president is in the news a lot, and they're doing a lot of like unconventional, choosing a lot of unconventional things to do with the government, with other governments, and there's a lot of ambitious talk and decisions going on here. Okay. So that's currently true, but that was also true. There's a big push here for an ambitious government right after the signing of the Declaration of Independence on 4th of July, 1776. It will also stimulate the planets that they can join. So again, Mercury. And again, on the last slide, I talked about how basically Mercury rules this chart, even though it seems like a very heavily Mars. And Mars is not to be ignored, but for sure. But this is essentially a mercurial chart here. And Mercury, again, is a dual planet. So this is kind of going to swing 2 ways here. Yeah, in a lot of ways. The dispositor, lord of the house it occupies. So the dispositor, the ruler of the house where Rahu sits is Mars. Or sorry, not Mars, Moon. So again, we've got Rahu, Moon, and Mercury. Rahu and Ketu, the north and south nodes of the moon, on their own can represent things like mental health, confusion, illusion, delusion. And now we're picking up Mercury because Mercury's conjoined with Rahu, and we're picking up Moon because Moon is the dispositor ruler of Cancer, which is where Rahu's sitting. When you have Moon and Mercury with Ketu or Rahu, even more so because Mercury represents the analytical mind, logical mind, and Moon represents the intuitive mind, there's going to be even more of an exaggeration of mental health issues, of strange behavior, of illusion, delusion, confusion, a lot of that going on, okay, for the country as a whole. And again, this is also in the 9th house of authority. Okay. The other thing is that it's also going to activate the star or the Tara that the nakshatra lord is in. Okay. Now the nakshatra, the house that Rahu is in a sign of Ashlesha, or not a sign of it's in the nakshatra of Ashlesha, which is the very last nakshatra in Cancer. Ashlesha is ruled by Mercury. So it's like, I was like, wow, like Rahu is with Mercury. It's a star of Mercury. Mercury's all over this chart. The nakshatra of the whole chart is in Mercury. I was like, wow, like you can't get more mercurial than this. And again, Mercury, it's like, it's you never quite know. It's a dual sign, so you never quite know what it's going to do. Okay. But this is why, like, we're getting a lot of unconventional actions coming from the government. The other thing is that this Third house here I thought was really interesting because we literally just had this a few days ago where K2 is aspecting Capricorn, Mars is aspecting Capricorn from Gemini, where it currently is. So Mars is in its natal position here. Sun was just in Capricorn a couple days ago. So you had K2, Mars, and Sun here, as well as Mercury. You were basically recreating this third house of explosive actions, with neighbors and siblings and things like that. And this is where, this tariff war, kind of suddenly, surprised everybody, I think, where the United States was starting to impose tariffs on its two big, import-export neighbors, Canada and Mexico. That was this third house of Capricorn lit up because it was essentially recreating this American revolutionary energy. Okay. Now, I would also say yogas are activated here. This is kind of an extra little thing. But Rahu and Ketu aren't involved in very many yogas, okay? But one of the yogas that they're involved in is a Kala Sarpa yoga. And there is a Kala Sarpa yoga in this chart. So this is when, all the planets are on one side of the Rahu Ketu axis or the other. Now, if Moon is on one side or Saturn is on one side, but everything else is on the other side, I still take it because Moon moves so fast and Saturn moves so slow. I still consider that to be a Kala Sarpa energy. Kala Sarpa will bring more, unusual activity, more bizarre activity, also more ambitious activity, and also more kind of chaotic activity. Okay. And that's essentially what we're seeing here. Okay. So currently active are Rahu, Mercury, Moon. And let's see, because we're running a Rahu Mahadasha, but that was also, again, a few weeks after the Declaration of Independence. So what we're currently experiencing in the United States is pretty similar to what was going on in the American Revolution. Okay. And again, because we have Rahu, Mercury, Moon, being active because we're running the Rahu Mahadasha, again, I start thinking of like eclipses. And then I was looking up, eclipse dates in 1776, and that's when I found that there was actually a partial solar eclipse that happened about 10 days after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And so this is a chart for the solar eclipse that happened on July 15th, 1776. Okay, now I've oriented it so that it's also Scorpio rising, so we can use it kind of as a transit chart. I know this isn't a transit talk, but I was kind of going down that rabbit hole. I thought other people might be interested as well. But you can see not only do we have a pravraja yoga in the 8th house, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury. Okay, so we still have this life focus and 8th house matters, so chronic long-term issues. But now we have Rahu, Moon, and Sun in the 9th house. Okay, so we have also a focus here on leadership and development of government. Okay, now the thing though is that because we have a solar eclipse, that means Moon is eclipsed, Sun is eclipsed, Mercury is eclipsed, and Venus is eclipsed here. So we have 4 out of 9 planets eclipsed. And again, Venus is a natural benefic. Mercury has the potential to be a benefic, Moon as well, but because of the mix-up here, I would say that's all kind of jettisoned, essentially. Okay. The other thing with this eclipse chart is that Sun is in the 9th house. This creates a karako, bhava, nashaya Sun. And that means that there's going to be issues with government, which there were. I mean, I think they fought until 1783 or 1784 to completely become independent. So this is like a start of a long, chaotic time, United States. Rahu is in Pusha at this time. So, again, luckily at this point, Rahu was in Pusha. So that means that Rahu became more about stabilizing things instead of being in Ashlesha. When Rahu is in Ashlesha, again, 10 days earlier, Ashlesha is symbolized by a snake. And so there's this kind of, snake-like energy, hissing and biting and hiding and, all this, covert activity, right? But also mesmerizing at the same time. So that has softened, although there's still issues with authorities here. But again, Venus, Mercury, Moon, Sun, these are all eclipsed or combusts, essentially. So you won't see these. So you won't see, there won't be a lot of emotional energy. Moon and Venus are the two emotional planets. Moon and Mercury are the two mental planets. So you won't see how people are, there's just all this kind of fighting going on. You won't see how people are really, thinking and feeling. They're going to be a bit stoic in their presentation. The other thing is Venus and Mercury in planetary war. So this is a head versus heart problem. Also, instability of Venus and Mercury's planets and the houses they own. So that's going to be 7th house, 8th house, 11th house, 12th house. So spouses, independent business, deep psychology, clubs, group, society, losses, expenditures. Yeah. Then we've got so again, this Rahu's running in the 9th house. It's not seen. Moon is not seen. It's because it's a new moon, and Sun is barely seen. There's a little bit of Sun here, but it's karako, bhava, nasha. And because Moon is eclipsed, that means the dispositor. There's some strength here, sort of, maybe inner strength, mental strength here, because Moon is in its own sign, but Moon is eclipsed. That means everything is hidden, in this 9th house of authority and government. So it's kind of like who's in charge, what's going on, you know. Yeah, very, very big question mark basically over the 9th house issues. And again, the 3rd house I mentioned was Capricorn, K2, Sun, Mars. They're going to be those planets, again, K2, Sun, and Mars are the 3 fire planets. Those are all going to be in the 3rd house of neighbors for the rest of 1776. And so when I was looking up what happened in the rest of 1776, the last, 5 months or so, this is what they call the New York, New Jersey campaign. So there was a lot of going back and forth between the British and the American revolutionaries that were fighting for uh, domination over New York and New Jersey ports. And again, these were neighbors because the signing of the Declaration of Independence happened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So New York and New Jersey were neighbors. So all this fighting was going over through the neighbors of Philadelphia where the Declaration was signed. And again, military struggle, unexpected, like all this kind of, from what little detail I could find, there was just back and forth, military struggles, some night action, which I think was not considered to be a conventional way to conduct war at that time. I don't know. But anyway, you can see a lot of destruction going on here in the 3rd house. Courage, but also destruction, chaos. Okay. And again, that flipping back and forth between people fighting for the British and the Americans, that happened apparently a lot. Okay. What's also kind of interesting is if you've seen my videos, is that New York City, which is part of what this big fight was about, because a lot of these, like Staten Island, there was a fight in Staten Island, there was a fight in Long Island, there was a fight in Manhattan Island, all the different islands of New York City was essentially what was up for kind of, up for grabs during the fight. New York City is a Taurus or Vrishabha Lugna, which essentially, if you flip this chart upside down, then all this chaotic energy in Capricorn is happening in the 9th house of authority for New York City. So it was constantly under barrage for whatever 1776 to 83. What is that? 7 years, 8 years, something like that. And then this Rahu Moon Sun business in Cancer, this 9th house is going to become the 3rd house for New York City. So again, hidden, unexpected, stuff going on with neighbors and that sort of thing. Okay, so essentially, this 3rd house was recently recreated, as I mentioned, because we've recently gotten to a tariff war with our neighbors, Canada and Mexico, with the United States. So anyway, this last slide was a little bit more Gochara than Dasha, but since we were here, I figured, for those who are interested in bringing some of this, almost ancient history for the United States, not that it's ancient by any means, we're a pretty young country, and bringing it to the present just to understand, more conceptually and tangibly how these energies play out, I thought it was maybe helpful for you. All right. Okay. So as always, thanks so much for stopping by, listening to one of my talks. I appreciate your support that way and all the other ways you support my work in the channel. So, subscribing and liking and posting lovely comments and sending in donations and all of that. All of it's very much appreciated. So thank you for that. All of my teaching videos on the subjects of Vedic astrology are my concepts playlist. They can be found there. Also, if you're interested in more famous birth charts, you can check out my birth chart archive list 2024 video, which hopefully I'll be updating in the next few months. But I have a list of all the birth charts, famous birth charts of famous people, places, moments, and time. And the videos you can find them in because you can't always tell by the title of the video that there are famous birth charts in them, like this one. Um, also, I do offer individual birth chart readings live on Zoom, live on Zoom, on Skype as a recorded video, and also I offer gift certificates if you ever want to give somebody a reading. So if you're interested in individual birth chart readings, you can email heartlightash@yahoo.com for more info on that. Also, I have another YouTube channel on natural medicine where I discuss Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, yoga, homeopathy, and naturopathic medicine, so other paradigms of medicine. And the name of that channel is Nature Source Care, so that's out there too if that's interesting to you. So, as always, I hope you found this talk helpful, useful, and interesting to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right, so until the next one, take good care. Namaste.